Raise problem solvers, not rule followers. This is primarily dedicated to the parents out there, especially the young parents. And I want to acknowledge that there's no right or wrong way to raise a child. A lot of things are personality dependent, situational dependent. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to apply a general idea to a lot of situations. When I was a young father, I was very rule-based. And I think a lot of that came from my youth and I'm trying to think of the right word, would be a chaotic environment where, the adults were unpredictable, I guess. And so I never really knew what to expect. And there was a lot of yelling, and there was a lot of you will get into trouble if you do or do not. There was a lot of rules, there was a lot of punishment, and there was less instruction and teaching and guiding and mentoring. It was very much sometimes afraid to act because I didn't really know what was good and what was not based on day to day. And that was very difficult as a young child all the way up through, a young teenager. And I made the mistakes as a young parent where I would engage in rule-based parenting, discipline, punishment, expectations. And as I've grown as a parent, now remarried with 2 stepsons, the opportunity has presented itself for me to redo and apply some of these lessons that I've learned. And one of them is this idea of raise decision makers, not rule followers. There's a lot to be said for resilience, for decision making, problem solving, critical thinking. Here's a good example. So if my 13-year-old asks me a question that, in my mind, should be very obvious, 2 things come to mind, right? Immediately, I'm either going to get upset because they're asking me what could be interpreted as a dumb question, or I'm going to, whether I snap back or provide the answer, right? But I think there's a better option here, is to pause, take a moment, and what I've come to do recently, whether they should know the answer or should try to figure out the answer, is what do you think? You tell me. Hey, where should this thing go? Putting away dishes. Hey, where do you think this thing should go? Where do you think it should go? Hey, how do you think we should handle this situation? How do you think we should handle that? And sometimes there's a little bit of a bite back to it because in some of the more simple life things, they should know, right? Like, how do we fold our towels? Dude, we folded towels 1,000 times in our house. How do we fold towels? We have a typical way we fold our towels. And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't my wife. But, you fold it, I'm like, what are you doing? That's not typically how we fold towels anymore. Well, how do I fold it? Well, have you folded a towel before? Yes. How do we usually fold the towels? Or where do things belong? Or, here's a situation. Maybe that's another, more serious one. I'm experiencing this with my friends or at school, whether it be conflict with a teacher or not confident in an assignment that I'm going to do. Maybe there's bullying, whether the target of bullying, being the bully, or just observing bullying. Well, what would you do about that? How would you feel in that situation? Get them to reflect and to think critically about critical reasoning, critical thinking. This is that idea, that philosophical idea of think, ponder, problem solve, and then determine what you think would be the best course of action to achieve the best possible outcome. And so this idea of problem solver versus rule follower, are you challenging young children, young adolescents to think about these things? Are you sending it back to them? Are you providing a solution for them, or getting upset at them because they're asking a question or because they're pushing boundaries? Or are you taking it as an opportunity to challenge them back and build the relationship? And there is absolutely a time and a place for all kinds of parenting. And I'm not going to tell people how to parent their children. I have my beliefs based off my experiences, my education, and the way that I want to build my family. But I'm not going to tell someone that a certain thing, as far as yelling, hitting, discipline, punishment, I'm not going to tell anybody that they're wrong. I will tell you what I believe and why. And this is one of those things that I think it's extremely important that we as parents work to develop our child's ability to think critically and determine how they would handle a situation. Because number one, you're not going to be there for all their challenges. So at some point, they're going to have to figure it out. And number two, if you're not the one that's going to take on the responsibility, somebody else will. I've talked in past videos about character development and culture development. Those are two things that if you do not deliberately create them, something will still be created and you may not like the results. This is very similar to that situation. If you don't deliberately create, help develop your child's ability to think critically, they are either going to learn it from somebody else or they're going to learn things that are not necessarily productive. Learning could be a victim mentality. Well, I don't know. How am I supposed to know that? Then they get into a situation. Well, it's not my fault. It's the fault of this, right? And then there's no accountability. They want to blame on circumstances. They want to blame on other people. And so there's this opportunity. If you're not around and something happens, whether it's a mom and dad are going to the grocery store or out on a date night or leaving the kids at home, how are the kids going to manage without you there? Can they think critically about the way that things should be run, the way that they should react, possibly to situations that they've never experienced before, and what might they do about that? So the first reaction shouldn't be, well, let's call mom and dad and ruin their date night because I'm going to ask them, should I unload the dishwasher or should I load the washing machine, right? Or my brother and I are having this conflict, or the dog's barking, or whatever the situation is. If you're going to teach your children to drive, don't just teach the mechanics of how to operate a motor vehicle. It's so much more than that. You have to understand rules of the road, theories of the rules, not just a rule, because there's always exception to rules. If they get behind the wheel of a car and they experience a circumstance that they've never experienced before, are they going to be able to navigate that effectively? Have you provided them the thought tools so that they can think critically about what to do about a particular situation? If you haven't, then you are setting them up for failure, where you're not around and then they don't know what to do, or they don't know, so they just do something. I've seen in traffic, people, they don't know, like the map won't populate, or they don't have their map up, they're not sure where to go, there's a left and a right turn, and they stop in the middle of the road. Are you kidding me, right? Like, make a decision, and if it was the wrong decision, then figure out how to fix it, but don't stop in the middle of the road and screw up the traffic pattern for everybody else. And by the way, I don't know if I've ever seen a 16-year-old do that, but I've seen lots of 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds do that, right? So we need to promote this idea of don't just understand how to think, but how to think about thinking. Does that make sense? To think about thinking, to consider the process of figuring things out, and to understand, based on this circumstance and this circumstance, which I have experienced, I experienced this new circumstance, what might I do in that situation? That's critical thinking. That's problem solving. And it's something that people don't naturally know how to do, especially when they experience things new. You have that fight or flight response. People are in traffic and something happens and they get super nervous. What do? They lock up. I don't know what to do. Well, you're driving 1,000-pound weapon. You got to figure it out, right? It's not intended to be a weapon, but anything can be a weapon if misused. And a vehicle is one of those things that if you are not confident in making effective decisions, you do not deserve to be behind a wheel simply because you passed a 20-question basic test on how a vehicle works and basic sign understanding. There has to be more to it than that. And I find it a little unfortunate that there isn't a little bit more. And I know state by state there's different things. Some states have longer tests. I come from Nebraska and it's like a 20-question test and a 5-minute drive around the block. And then here you go. Here's your keys to a 1,000-pound missile with no surety that you're going to comprehend the responsibility associated with it. And so, yes, I get frustrated in traffic. Now, I'm not frustrated at you. I'm frustrated at the person that taught you how to drive. I'm mad at your dad or your grandpa or your mom or whoever else tried or failed to teach you how to drive. But any situation that you might experience, conflict, and as people get older, people talk about sending their kids off to college. Are your kids prepared to go to college, or are you just sending them off hopeful that they're going to make the right decisions? Because, man, if you're planning on hope and you haven't provided the skills, they're screwed. Nah, not necessarily. But they're definitely going to have a harder time. And it is your responsibility. It's our responsibility as a community of adults to help people. That's why mentorship is so important. It doesn't have to be your parents. It doesn't have to be you. Who are you providing in life to provide the guidance and direction so people can learn critical skills? What experiences are you putting in? And that's where the whole helicopter parent thing comes in, or the over-aggressive sport parent that demands that their kid plays. You're solving your kid's problems. You're not allowing them to think critically and experience difficult things. And without that experience, you're setting them up for failure, because either they're not going to know how to deal with failure or rejection. They're not going to know how to address conflict and possible, schoolyard or alley fights. And yeah, I'm a Gen X, and that's the extreme thing. I don't know if kids fight in alleys anymore, but man, that shit happened all the time when I was a kid. It's just the way things went down, and we rarely told our parents because we didn't want to get in trouble, even though we were the one that got jumped. And I didn't want to tell my mom because she was a loose cannon, and she'd go out and either, she'd yell at me for bothering her, or she'd go yell at the kids, which we all know that's the greatest thing, that your mom goes out in the streets and yells at other kids, "Stop picking on my son." Thanks, Mom. Yeah, that didn't go over very well. But I didn't have the skills. I wasn't provided the skills of how to deal with conflict. All I ever understood was yelling and screaming and emotional dysregulation and bad choices, bad decisions, bad relationships. I didn't know what it meant to be an effective person. And so it took me a long time to figure that out. What does that mean? How do I do it? And so, yeah, I'm very passionate about providing people the opportunity, giving them the guidance. It's okay to, look over the shoulder from a distance and then review and talk about, hey, this is how that could have went better. But people have to be given an opportunity. Then they have to be given the guidance. They have to be provided the skills. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe people don't recognize skill-based learning. They just assume, oh, I'm going to teach you this, and then you need to do what you're told. Where's the skill-based learning? People talk all the time about resilience and leadership. Resilience and leadership aren't skills. Resilience is the demonstration of your ability to deal with stress and adversity and act appropriately when you're feeling pressure. Leadership is not a skill. It's your ability to effectively motivate people to accomplish goals. And their skills involve doing that, but leadership itself is not the skill. So conflict resolution isn't the skill. That's the demonstration of your ability to mitigate and overcome and smooth out conflict. So if you're not learning the skills necessary, you're not going to be able to get the outcome you desire. If there's conflict in your relationship, well, what are you doing to deal with that conflict in a way that looks at an outcome that you desire. If you don't know these things, then you don't have the ability. And so going, as young as possible, well, at what point should we be teaching kids resilience skills? As soon as they're able. When should I allow a child to understand that, my child can't use a knife, that's dangerous. Well, have you allowed them to use it? Have you watched it? Have you shown them, I'm going to sharpen this and then I'm going to cut this carrot? By the way, if that's your finger, the same thing's going to happen. That's a lesson. And then let them cut a few carrots. Let them get a few nicks on their fingers. They'll figure it out pretty quick. There you go. There's the Gen X coming out. But if you're not provided the opportunity, I can't just tell my child, hey, if you run in the dirt too fast, you might trip and fall over. Okay, what does that mean? Until they actually trip and fall over, they're not really going to know. And I'm not going to intentionally put my children in a situation where they're going to get hurt, but I'm also not going to wrap them in bubble wrap and tell them don't run because something bad might happen. So I need to provide them opportunities, but I'm also going to provide them the skills and the training that they need so they can act appropriately in those circumstances and understand themselves. What are the boundaries? What can I push a little bit, but what's too far? What's the behavior that I need to show? What's the mental skill that I need to use? You're sitting at dinner the other night at the dinner table, and one of the kids was talking about this mean teacher. Oh, okay. Well, what does she do that's mean? She's rude. Okay. Well, what does she say that's rude? Oh, she tells kids that they're rubbish. And of course, then I'm like, oh, do I need to go beat down this teacher? I'm like, well, what do you mean? Does she actually looks at a child and says they are rubbish? And he's like, well, no, I think she was talking about their homework. Oh, okay. So she said their homework was rubbish? Well, I don't know. Well, come on, dude. Like, at what point are you now just throwing shit out? And you need to take responsibility for the fact that you're saying stuff that's not actually true. So now you could potentially be causing problems because I'm ready to go down to school and lay a beat down on a teacher because she's calling my kid rubbish, but that's not actually what happened. That's discernment. It's understanding how to behave in a certain circumstances based off the skills that I've been taught, especially in circumstances where I don't have experience. So consider that, not only for the children you are or are not you might be raising, but also for you. Do you understand? Do you behave in a way that is productive for the environment? Do some self-reflection and see, everything from driving in traffic. Do you understand traffic patterns? Are you the problem? And be self-aware and be self-critical. It's okay. But also when it comes to things like relationships and conflict and all these other things, how do you respond? Do you respond appropriately? Are you comfortable in these certain situations? Or are you at least comfortable knowing that you're building the skill and you're trying and you're doing self-reflection? And that's probably the number one key. If you're doing self-reflection and you're thinking about your behavior and how you can get better, you're probably on a pretty good track. But if you're the first one that's going to point out everybody else and their flaws and the reason why they're the problem, you're the problem, and you need to just stop. So self-reflection and self-awareness is the beginning. Then it becomes self-regulation through skill development. And then from there, you become self-critical and you start developing even further. And that's what we're going for. So do some self-reflection. Goal for the week is where's some areas where maybe you could use some additional help, and maybe where some areas that you previously thought you were good that maybe need to be improved a little bit. Could take a conversation with a friend. So I've got my wife, she's really good about being honest, but being gentle about, actually I think that's a weak area for you and I think you need to work on that. My responsibility then is to accept that feedback and consider that she has my best interest in mind and she might know what she's talking about. And therefore I might want to work on one of those things that she points out. So have a great week. Go work on something. Get better.